Michael Grant stood frozen on the front steps of his modest home in St. Andrew, Jamaica, the late afternoon sun beating down on his shoulders. The man in front of him, someone he barely recognized, delivered words that turned his world upside down. "Lisa's second child isn't yours," the man said, his voice steady with an unsettling confidence. "She told me herself." The words felt like a punch to Michael's stomach. He stared at the man, searching his face for any hint of deceit, a reason to dismiss this as a cruel lie. But there was none. His tone, his expression, they all carried the weight of certainty. Michael's throat tightened as his mind raced. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice low but trembling. The man didn't flinch. "You heard me. That child is mine. Lisa told me everything." A chill crept through Michael, despite the warmth of the sun. His vision blurred as questions flooded his mind. How could this be true? How could Lisa, his wife and the mother of his children, betray him like this? Was this man lying? Or had his entire life been built on deception? For a moment, Michael felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the doorframe, his breathing shallow. The man, seemingly unaffected by the emotional bomb he had just dropped, stood there with his arms crossed, as if daring Michael to challenge him. Michael finally found his voice, though it came out strained. "If this is some kind of sick joke." "It's not," the man interrupted, his tone sharp. "Ask for yourself. She'll tell you." He replayed the man's words in his head over and over again. Each time they cut deeper. Michael thought about their life together. 6 children, years of hard work, the sacrifices he made to keep their family afloat. He had trusted Lisa with everything. She was the one constant in his chaotic world. And now, with one accusation, that trust felt fragile. Could Lisa really have done this? Had she lied to him for years? If you want more gripping stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that keep you hooked and spark meaningful conversations. Michael Grant was a man built on loyalty and discipline. He worked tirelessly at his auto repair shop in St. Andrew, Jamaica, spending long hours fixing engines under the scorching sun. The shop wasn't just his livelihood. It was his way of keeping his family secure. For Michael, providing for his wife Lisa and their 6 children was his greatest priority. Lisa Thompson was a sharp, ambitious woman who owned a small but successful wine and drink store in town. The shop was her pride, always busy with locals and tourists passing through to pick up a bottle of something cold. She loved her work, not for the money it brought in, but for the freedom it gave her. Despite her earnings, Lisa rarely spent her money on the household or their children. That responsibility always seemed to fall on Michael, who never complained about it. Michael's mother, who lived just a street over, often stepped in to care for the children, while Lisa spent her days at the store. It wasn't uncommon for Lisa to leave early in the morning and not return until late. Her day filled with managing stock, chatting with customers, and counting her profits. She thrived on the social interactions her store provided, always at ease around people, whether they were regulars or newcomers. Lisa's appearance was as striking as her personality. She loved bold lipstick, perfectly applied eyeliner, and stylish outfits that made her stand out wherever she went. Her confidence was undeniable, and her flashy nature drew attention, especially from men. Michael noticed it, of course, but he never let it bother him. He trusted her, and in his eyes, Lisa's ability to charm others was simply part of her personality. "She knows how to work a room," Michael would say to himself, more amused than concerned. But there were moments, small and fleeting, that lingered in the back of Michael's mind. He couldn't ignore the fact that Lisa's work kept her surrounded by men, customers, delivery drivers, and even her suppliers. She had a way of laughing a little too loudly, leaning in a little too closely. But Michael brushed it off as part of her business persona. "She's just being friendly," he'd reassure himself. Michael's long hours at the shop meant he wasn't always home to see the full picture. Lisa's independence was something he admired, but also created a distance he didn't always notice. Her late nights, her phone always buzzing with messages, and her insistence on handling her own affairs. All of it blended into the rhythm of their lives. Neighbors occasionally commented on how often Lisa was at her store or how glamorous She looked even on regular days. "She's always so put together," they'd say. Michael would smile and nod, never letting their remarks get under his skin. To him, Lisa's life was her own, and as long as the family was taken care of, he didn't see the harm in it. But while Michael trusted Lisa completely, there were small, almost imperceptible shifts in their dynamic. He didn't notice how often Lisa avoided his questions about her day, or how she began spending more time at the store than ever before. To Michael, their life seemed steady, a partnership where he worked hard to provide, and Lisa pursued her dreams. What Michael didn't know was that beneath the surface of their routine lay secrets he could never have imagined. Secrets that would shatter the foundation of the life he had worked so hard to build. Michael hadn't planned to stop by Lisa's store that afternoon. It was a quiet day at the shop, and he had finished his work earlier than usual. He thought surprising her with lunch might brighten her day. But as he parked his truck across the street, something felt off. Through the open doorway of the store, Michael spotted Lisa, standing close to a man he didn't recognize. Too close. At first, he told himself it was innocent, just a friendly conversation. But as he watched, he noticed the way Lisa leaned into him, laughing softly, her hand lightly touching his arm. The man's hand lingered on her waist, his posture relaxed and familiar. Michael's stomach turned. He stepped out of the truck, his boots hitting the pavement heavily, each step carrying a mix of confusion and anger. When he entered the store, the laughter stopped. Lisa froze, her eyes wide with a flicker of panic. The man took a step back, his expression unreadable. "What's going on here?" Michael's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the edge beneath it. Lisa quickly recovered, her voice overly casual. "Michael, this is just a customer. He was asking about some wine." The man nodded, but his body language betrayed him. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who'd been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Michael's eyes darted between them, his instincts screaming at him. "A customer, huh?" he said, his voice lowering. "What kind of wine need that much touching?" Lisa's face flushed. "Don't do this, Michael," she snapped, her tone defensive. "You're overreacting." Overreacting. The word hit him like a slap. He stared at her for a long moment, trying to find any trace of the woman he thought he knew. The room felt unbearably quiet, except for the ringing in his ears. Without another word, Michael turned and walked out. He didn't look back as he got into his truck and drove home. The confrontation at the store was just the beginning. News of the incident spread quickly through their small community. Michael could feel the stares and hear the whispers whenever he walked down the street or went to the market. People he had known for years avoided his gaze, and the few who spoke to him offered hollow words of sympathy. Lisa's actions didn't just hurt Michael, they tore through the family. Their 6 children were confused and scared, struggling to understand why their parents weren't speaking to each other. Michael did his best to shield them from the truth, but the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. After weeks of icy silence, Lisa finally admitted to the affair. She didn't offer excuses, nor did she apologize in a way that felt genuine. "It just happened," she said, her tone cold and detached. Those 3 words echoed in Michael's mind like a cruel joke. The pain of betrayal was one thing, but the public humiliation was something Michael couldn't bear. He felt stripped of his dignity, exposed for everyone to see. The man who had prided himself on being a loyal husband and devoted father now felt like the punchline of a cruel joke. Eventually, Michael and Lisa agreed to separate. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was one Michael felt he had no choice but to make. The thought of staying with her, of pretending everything was fine, was unbearable. He moved into a rental house nearby, close enough to be there for the children, but far enough to escape the daily reminders of what he had lost. He kept working long hours at the auto shop, pouring himself into his work as a way to avoid the pain. But the loneliness followed him everywhere. Even after the separation, Michael continued to support the children. He paid for their school fees, their clothes, and their meals, just as he always had. But every payment felt like a bitter reminder of the life he had built, only to see it crumble. Lisa remained a constant presence in Michael's life, though not in the way he had hoped. Despite her infidelity, she made it clear that she expected him to continue supporting their 6 children without fail. Michael, bound by a sense of duty, didn't argue. He had always provided for his family, and he wasn't about to let his children suffer because of the rift between him and their mother. At first, the child support requests seemed reasonable. School fees, groceries, clothes. It was all for the kids. But as time went on, Lisa's demands grew more frequent and less about necessity. She wanted money for things Michael couldn't understand. Extravagant purchases she justified under the guise of being for the children. "Michael, I need $500 by tomorrow," Lisa texted one evening. No explanation, no request, just an expectation. When he asked what the money was for, her response was sharp. "You're their father. Figure it out." It wasn't just the financial strain that wore on him. It was the way Lisa made him feel like an ATM, not a man who had once been her husband. She knew Michael's sense of responsibility wouldn't let him refuse, and she leaned into it, pushing him further and further. Michael often found himself driving home from work, his thoughts racing as he tried to calculate how much he could spare from his already tight budget. The auto shop was steady, but it wasn't enough to keep up with Lisa's endless requests. Every payment he made felt like a weight pressing down on his shoulders, a constant reminder of the life they used to share and the betrayal that had ripped it apart. The worst part was how unapologetic Lisa was. She didn't hesitate to call him out in front of others if he didn't respond quickly enough. "You're the father of these children," she'd say loudly, ensuring that anyone nearby could hear. "It's your responsibility to take care of them." Michael rarely argued back. He didn't want to add fuel to the fire or give Lisa more ammunition to use against him. But the public humiliation stung, each incident leaving him feeling more drained than the last. His friends noticed a change in him. He had grown quieter, more withdrawn. When they asked what was wrong, Michael would shrug it off, unwilling to admit how deeply Lisa's demands were affecting him. But inside, he felt like he was being chipped away, piece by piece. Even when he tried to focus on his children, Lisa's presence lingered. She'd show up unexpectedly at his home, sometimes to drop off the kids, other times confront him about money she felt was overdue. Every interaction left him tense and exhausted, her words echoing long after she left. Michael had always prided himself on being a man who could handle anything. But as Lisa's relentless demands continued, he began to wonder how much more he could take. Michael stood frozen on the front steps of his modest home in St. Andrew, Jamaica, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. In front of him was a man he barely recognized, his presence unexpected and unsettling. "I've been trying to find you," the man said, his voice steady yet firm. His expression carried no malice, only a determination that seemed to demand Michael's full attention. Michael narrowed his eyes, gripping the doorframe. "What is this about?" The man took a breath, his gaze unwavering. "Lisa's second child isn't yours," he said, the words falling like a hammer. "She told me herself." Michael's heart jolted. For a moment, the world around him seemed to slow. He stared at the man, his mind scrambling to make sense of what he'd just heard. "What are you talking about?" Michael asked, his voice low but edged with warning. The man didn't flinch. "Lisa and I were involved back when she got pregnant. I didn't know she was married. She never told me. I was just a visitor in town, passing through. But I used to stop by her store a lot. She said the baby was mine." Michael's hands clenched at his sides. "You're lying. You don't even know what you're saying." The man shook his head, his tone calm but insistent. "I'm not lying, Mr. Grant. Lisa told me everything. I didn't find out she was married until much later. By then it was too late." Michael glared at him, his anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Why are you telling me this now? Why come here?" "I didn't know where to find you," the man replied, his voice softening slightly. "I only found out recently who you were. I thought you should know the truth. She even sent me pictures of the baby after she delivered." He paused, pulling his phone from his pocket and holding it out. Michael hesitated before taking the phone, his stomach churning as he stared at the screen. There was a photo of Lisa holding a newborn in her arms, smiling at the camera. The timestamp on the image was from years ago, right around the time Lisa had given birth to their second child. "She sent this to me," the man said quietly. "She said the baby looked just like me. That's why I came." You deserve to know. Michael's grip on the phone tightened as he felt a mix of rage, confusion, and disbelief course through him. He shoved the phone back into the man's hand, his voice trembling as he spoke. Get off my property. The man nodded, stepping back toward the street. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but it's the truth. Ask her yourself. Michael didn't respond. He watched as the man walked away, leaving him rooted to the spot. The air around him felt heavy, each breath coming harder than the last. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the man's words settling over him like a storm cloud. If there was even a shred of truth to what the man had said, it meant that everything Michael thought he knew about his family, about his life, was built on a lie. For the first time in his life, Michael felt completely untethered, and he knew there was only one person who could give him the answers he needed. That evening, Michael drove to Lisa's apartment, the man's words still echoing in his mind. He didn't bother calling or texting her first. This wasn't a conversation for the phone. When he arrived, he knocked hard on the door. He could hear footsteps inside, and after a moment, Lisa opened it, her face a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Michael, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Michael said, stepping inside before she could protest. Lisa closed the door behind him, crossing her arms. This better be important. The kids are asleep. Michael didn't waste time. He turned to face her, his expression hard. A man came to my house today, he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. He told me our second child isn't mine. He said you told him that. Lisa's face froze, her confidence faltering for just a second before she regained composure. What? That's ridiculous. Who is this man? Why are you even listening to him? Don't do that, Lisa, Michael said, his voice rising slightly. Don't act like I'm crazy for asking. He didn't seem like he was lying. And now I'm standing here wondering if everything I believe about my life is a lie. Lisa rolled her eyes, walking toward the kitchen counter. Michael, you've always been so gullible. Some stranger shows up and says something outrageous, and you just believe him. Michael followed her, his voice cutting through the room. Do you remember when we first got married? The doctor told me I had a low sperm count. They said it would be difficult for me to have kids. Do you remember that? Lisa didn't respond. Her back turned to him. I thought the treatments worked, Michael continued, his voice quieter but laced with anger. I thought we got lucky. But now I'm questioning everything, Lisa. Everything. Lisa finally turned around, her expression defensive. So what? You're accusing me of lying about all of it? Of making this up? Do you hear how ridiculous you sound? Michael stepped closer, his frustration boiling over. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I'm going to find out one way or another. I'm going to get the truth. Lisa's eyes flickered with something Michael couldn't place. Fine, she said flatly. Do whatever you want. They are your kids. God gave us those blessings after everything the doctor said. Michael stared at her for a moment longer, searching for any sign of remorse, any hint that she might tell the truth. But there was nothing. He turned and walked out of the apartment, the sound of the door closing behind him punctuating the silence. Driving home, Michael felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. He replayed the conversation in his mind, dissecting every word, every expression, Lisa's defensiveness, her refusal to answer directly. It all added to the storm of doubt raging inside him. As he pulled into his driveway, his mind drifted back to the early days of their marriage. He had been so hopeful back then, so sure that the treatments had worked when Lisa announced her first pregnancy. But now, that hope felt like it was built on a fragile foundation, one that could crumble under the weight of the truth. Michael sat in his car for a long time, staring at the house in front of him. He knew he couldn't let this go. He needed answers, no matter how much they might hurt. Michael Grant sat alone in his dimly lit living room, his head in his hands. The man's words replayed in his mind like a haunting melody he couldn't silence. The doubt that had been planted had now grown into something he couldn't ignore. He needed answers, not rumors, not guesses, but the truth. He picked up his phone and began researching DNA testing services. The cost made his stomach twist. He didn't have that kind of money lying around, but this wasn't something he could push aside. His children, his entire life, depended on the answers. Michael swallowed his pride and called a close friend, someone he trusted. The conversation wasn't easy. "I need to borrow some money," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't go into details, and his friend didn't press him. By the next day, he had enough to move forward. The process began with a phone call to the testing center. Michael's hands trembled as he explained what he needed. DNA tests for all 6 of his children. The woman on the other end of the line asked questions, her voice calm and professional, but every word made his chest tighten. He could barely focus on what she was saying. When the kits arrived, Michael felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew once he started, there would be no turning back. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the small, sterile packages that held the key to his family's truth. Michael decided to collect the samples during the children's weekend visit. It was the only time he could ensure Lisa wouldn't interfere or suspect anything. He told himself this was for the best. It wasn't their fault, and they didn't deserve to carry the burden of his doubts. When they arrived, their laughter filled the house as they scattered their backpacks and hugged him tightly. For a moment, the warmth of their presence softened his turmoil. But as the night wore on, the kits on the kitchen counter became an unspoken reminder of what he had to do. The next morning, Michael approached them one by one, keeping his tone light. "Hey, I need to do something for your health records," he said with a smile. "It's just a quick cheek swab. Nothing scary. And let's keep this between us, okay? A little secret for Mom." His youngest giggled as Michael gently swabbed her cheek. "This tickles, Daddy," she said, squirming in her chair. Michael forced a laugh, even as his hands trembled. Her innocence broke his heart, but he managed to keep his composure. The middle children didn't ask many questions. Distracted by cartoons and snacks, they complied easily, trusting him completely. But when Michael approached his eldest, now 16, he sensed hesitation. "What's this for, Dad?" his son asked, his tone skeptical as he eyed the swab in Michael's hand. Michael paused, his heart thudding in his chest. He couldn't risk slipping up now. "It's just for some updated medical records," he said smoothly. "Nothing serious, I promise." His son frowned but didn't press further. Reluctantly, he opened his mouth, allowing Michael to collect the sample. "This feels weird," the boy muttered as Michael sealed the swab in its packet. Michael ruffled his son's hair and chuckled. "I know, it's a little odd, but you'll thank me later when everything's all sorted out." The boy smirked and walked off, satisfied with the answer. As Michael finished with the last sample, he exhaled shakily. The hardest part was over, but he couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at him. These were the children he had loved and raised, and yet here he was questioning their very existence in his life. He carefully packaged the samples, double-checking every label before sealing the envelope. As he handed the package to the courier later that day, a lump formed in his throat. Watching it disappear into the courier's hands felt like he was letting go of something precious, though he couldn't quite explain what. The drive back home was quiet, the sound of the tires on the road doing little to drown out his thoughts. He glanced at the empty car seats in the rear-view mirror, where his children had laughed and played just hours earlier. Now, the silence felt heavy, and every mile brought him closer to the answers he feared. Michael gripped the steering wheel tightly, whispering to himself, "I just need to know. I have to know." The days that followed were some of the longest of Michael's life. He barely ate, barely slept. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart jumped. He avoided seeing Lisa during this time. He couldn't face her. Not yet. His mind raced with possibilities. What if it wasn't true? What if only one child wasn't his? What if they all were? But with each passing day, a deeper fear began to take hold. Michael had spent the day in a haze, his mind clouded with anxiety after receiving a call from the lab that morning. "The results are ready," the voice on the other end had said. They told him he could pick them up at his earliest convenience. He left for the lab without hesitation, the drive there feeling longer than it should have. When he arrived, the envelope was handed to him, crisp and heavy with the weight of its contents. He thanked the receptionist with a nod, his voice caught in his throat, and left without looking at it. All day, the envelope sat untouched on the passenger seat of his truck, staring at him like an uninvited guest. He drove aimlessly for hours, stopping only to stare out at the ocean from a quiet stretch of road. He couldn't bring himself to open it. He wasn't ready to know the truth. By the time Michael returned home, the sun had set and the house was cloaked in darkness. He carried the envelope inside and set it on the table, avoiding it like it might explode. The hours crawled by as he paced the floor, the silence of the house amplifying the storm in his mind. Finally, long after midnight, Michael sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the unopened envelope. His hands trembled as he picked it up, his heart pounding in his chest. The fear of what he might find was almost paralyzing, but he knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. He opened the envelope, carefully unfolding the papers with shaky hands. His eyes scanned the page, searching for the results, for the first child, then the second, then the third. Each result brought a fresh wave of devastation. 0, 0, 0. Not one, not a single child was biologically his. The report showed a 0% match for all 6 children. The paper slipped from his hands onto the bed. Michael sat motionless, his body frozen as the enormity of the revelation hit him. The room seemed to close in around him, the silence pressing down like a weight. He stared at the wall, his mind blank as the truth settled over him like a suffocating fog. Every memory, every moment he had shared with his children, now felt like a cruel illusion. He thought of the sacrifices he had made, the long hours at the shop, the birthdays he'd worked through, the nights he had gone without so his family could have more. And for what? Michael's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms as tears streamed down his face. He had built his entire life around a lie. Everything he thought he knew, everything he thought he was, had been ripped away in an instant. He felt hollow, as though the very core of his identity had been shattered. Days turned into weeks, and Michael slipped into a silence that even those closest to him couldn't penetrate. The man who had once been the bedrock of his family now found himself completely unmoored, consumed by a deep, aching void that left him questioning who he even was. The DNA results hadn't just changed his life. They had destroyed it. At the auto shop, where he once greeted customers with a smile and jokes, he now worked in near silence, answering only when absolutely necessary. His coworkers noticed a change that said nothing, exchanging concerned glances as Michael moved through his day like a ghost. The warmth he had once carried seemed to have vanished, leaving behind a coldness that made even casual conversations feel impossible. At home, Michael's quiet demeanor became even more unsettling. He barely spoke to the children when they visited, his responses short and devoid of emotion. He no longer sat with them at dinner or helped with their homework. Instead, he retreated to his room, staring at the ceiling or sitting in the dark for hours. One evening, without saying a word to anyone, the day began like any other. Michael woke early, made himself a simple breakfast, and stared out of the window of his small, quiet home. His children were with his mother for the school holiday, giving him space to think. The DNA report sat on the table in front of him, its pages spread out like pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to put together. He had read 100 times, but the word still felt like a knife to his chest. By mid-morning, Michael packed a small bag. Inside, he placed the DNA report and the machete he had purchased just days earlier. He wrapped the blade in a towel to keep it hidden, zipped the bag shut, and walked out the door without a second glance. Lisa opened the door, her face shifting from irritation to confusion when she saw him standing there. "Michael, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said flatly, stepping inside before she could refuse. Lisa crossed her arms as Michael placed the bag on the kitchen counter. "If this is about money, I already told you." "It's not about money," Michael interrupted, pulling the DNA report from the bag. He unfolded the papers and thrust them toward her. "It's about this." Lisa froze, her eyes scanning the documents. Her face paled as she realized what she was looking at. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You know exactly what it is," Michael said, his tone sharp. "Explain this to me, Lisa. Explain why not one of the 6 children I raised is mine. Who are their fathers? How many men did you sleep with?" Lisa took a step back, her arms dropping to her sides. "Michael, Don't lie to me," he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. Tell me the truth. Lisa's voice cracked as she spoke. You knew you had a low sperm count, Michael. You knew the chances of having kids were slim. So you decided to sleep with other men, Michael interrupted, his voice trembling. And then you lied to me. You let me believe they were mine. You let me pour my entire life into them. I got treatment. Lisa, he said, tears beginning to form. And I thought it worked after we got pregnant with our first child. Michael's anger bubbled over, tears streaming down his face. So, why didn't you leave me, Lisa? Why didn't you tell me the truth? You let me suffer. I labored for this family. I worked myself to bone and gave you everything I had. And for what? So you could humiliate me? Lisa tried to step closer, reaching out to him. Michael, please. Don't touch me, he barked, stepping back and pulling the machete from the bag. Lisa's breath caught as she stared at the blade in his hand. Michael, put that down. Please. We can work this out. Work this out? He repeated bitterly, his voice cracking. There's nothing left to work out, Lisa. You destroyed everything. You made me a fool in front of the entire world. He began to cry harder, his sobs echoing through the small apartment. You knew, Lisa. You knew the kids weren't mine. And you still harassed me for money. You let me carry that burden while you laughed behind my back. Lisa's tears turned into desperate pleas. Michael, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But Michael wasn't listening anymore. His rage had consumed him. Years of betrayal and heartbreak erupted in that moment. With one swift motion, Michael swung the machete. Lisa screamed, stumbling backward as she tried to shield herself. The room filled with the sound of her cries and the sickening thud of the blade. Michael's movements were mechanical, his emotions numbed by the overwhelming weight of his pain. When it was over, the apartment was silent. Lisa's lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor, blood pooling around her. Michael stood over her, the machete slipping from his trembling hands and clattering onto the tiles. His breathing was ragged, his face streaked with tears. He stared at her motionless body, his mind blank. The rage that had driven him moments ago was gone, replaced by an empty, hollow silence. He stumbled out of the apartment, the bright afternoon sun almost blinding him as he walked aimlessly down the street. The world around him seemed painfully normal. Birds chirped. Children played in the distance. Cars passed by, as if nothing had happened. Michael kept walking, his hands stained with blood, his mind replaying the words he had screamed at Lisa. I labored in vain. He walked aimlessly down the streets of St. Andrew, blood smeared across his hands and shirt. His face was blank, his expression devoid of emotion, as though the weight of what he'd done hadn't yet reached him. Neighbors stopped in their tracks, their eyes widening in horror as they took in the scene. Some gasped, others whispered among themselves. A brave few approached him cautiously. Michael, one called out, his voice trembling. What happened? Why is there blood? Michael didn't stop walking. He didn't look at them. His voice was cold, almost robotic. She deserved it, he said flatly, the words chilling everyone within earshot. She made me labor in vain. The neighbor froze, his breath catching at the sharp finality of Michael's tone. Someone in the growing crowd turned and ran toward Lisa's apartment, the door still slightly ajar. Inside, the scene was worse than anyone could have imagined. Lisa lay on the floor lifeless, surrounded by a pool of blood. The machete sat a few feet away, its blade glinting under the overhead light. Gasps and screams erupted as those who had entered stumbled back out, their faces pale. Call the police, someone shouted, their voice cracking with panic. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as the police rushed to the scene. Michael had stopped walking by then, standing on the side of the road, as if waiting for them to arrive. He didn't resist when the officers approached, their voices firm as they ordered him to the ground and cuffed his hands behind his back. They demanded answers. What did you do? One officer asked, his voice heavy with anger. Michael's response sent shivers through everyone around him. She lied to me, he said quietly. She knew they weren't mine. She made everything meaningless. Everything I worked for, nothing but lies. The officers exchanged uneasy glances as they guided him into the back of the squad car. Meanwhile, the neighbors stood in stunned silence, whispering among themselves, struggling to comprehend how a man so devoted to his family had committed such an unthinkable act. As the police car pulled away, one phrase echoed in the minds of everyone who had heard it. "She made me labor in vain." Michael Grant planned this, the prosecutor stated firmly, pointing toward Michael. This was no crime of passion. This was calculated, deliberate, and cold-blooded. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He purchased the machete. He went to her home when the children were not there, and he carried out a brutal act of violence. This was premeditated murder. The words echoed through the courtroom, drawing gasps from the audience. Michael sat motionless at the defense table, his face expressionless as the prosecutor laid out the case. The evidence was undeniable. The machete, the DNA reports, Michael's chilling confession to the police. The prosecution painted him as a man consumed by rage, someone who had decided that vengeance was the only solution to his pain. When the defense took the floor, the tone shifted. Yes, Michael Grant killed Lisa Thompson. His lawyer began, pausing to let the words settle. But this case isn't just about what he did. It's about why he did it. The lawyer's voice grew more impassioned. For years, this man was deceived, manipulated, and emotionally abused. He devoted his life to a family he believed was his, only to discover it was built on lies. That betrayal pushed him to a breaking point. The defense called witnesses who spoke of Michael's character before the tragedy, how he worked tirelessly to provide for his family, how he was always there for his children, how he carried himself with dignity despite the challenges life threw at him. But the prosecution countered with chilling reminders of his actions, the calculated nature of the attack, the fact that he had hidden the machete in his bag, and his lack of hesitation when confronted afterward. When the jury returned with a verdict, the room fell silent. Guilty of second-degree murder, the foreperson announced. Michael sat still, his expression unchanged as the words sealed his fate. During sentencing, the judge addressed Michael directly. Your actions were deliberate and devastating. While your pain is undeniable, it does not justify the choice you made to take a life. I sentence you to 40 years in prison. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some people shook their heads. Others wept quietly. Michael remained calm, his demeanor unshaken as he was led away in handcuffs. Questions lingered in the minds of everyone present. What if Lisa had told him the truth from the start? What if Michael had sought help instead of revenge? This case raises difficult questions about trust, betrayal, and the consequences of unchecked emotions. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you want more gripping stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. This is Ruthless Realities. Until next time,